All right, let's admit it. Death is one of the scariest cards in the tarot. It's one that you don't often want to see in a reading. A lot of people think that it means an actual physical death coming to them, whether it be their own or someone they know. That is not what this card means, and I don't want you to ever think when you see this card in a reading that it means there's a literal death coming. Now that said, a figurative death, absolutely. You can expect that's on the way. So let's take a look at the card itself. And again, we're using the Rider-Waite artwork, which is the most commonly accepted and understood when we look at the meanings of these cards. When you look at this artwork, what you'll see is a skeleton wearing a suit of armor, riding a horse, holding on to a flag that features a white flower on it. Around the horse's feet, you'll see that there is one person who is appearing to be dead, and 3 others who appear to be in some form of pleading with death and or succumbing to death. Behind the skeleton and the horse, you'll see there's a river with a boat on it, and in the very far back on the far right, you'll see that there's a sun setting between 2 towers. That's a nice look at the artwork itself, but what does it all mean? I want to start with the people on this card. Let's skip the skeleton on the horse, the big scary figure. We're going to skip him for now. We're going to go to the people that we see who are on the ground. You'll see that the man who's lying on the ground, who looks like he's already deceased, there's a crown next to him, which implies that this is a king who has passed away. But then you'll also see near the horse's feet, there's a small child wearing a ring of flowers around his head, not dressed very royally, doesn't look like he has a lot of money. Next to him is a young female who also appears to be ill, perhaps succumbing to death herself. She's dropped her little flower on the ground next to her. Neither one of them look like they are of royalty or of a noble status. But behind them, you will see a bishop who's in very, very rich robes, who has the cross on his glove, so he's definitely somebody who's got that closer to God connection. But he's not praying here, he's pleading. And what this shows is that death is really not discriminatory. It doesn't matter who you are, what your background is. When death comes for you, death comes for you. And there's no avoiding it. Everybody has to face death at some point. Now I say that and I just want to remind you, this card does not mean a literal death. But we need to understand these symbols to understand what it does mean. So let's look at it again. Besides the people, let's look at the river. There's a boat on the river. This is a very, very straightforward symbol. A river Styx, we know, the river that we take into the afterlife. You can assume that the boat you see there will transport you into the afterlife when it is your time. And then again, we see in the far background the sun between the towers there. Now in this case, when you look at the sky, you'll see some darkness at the top of the card. That implies that the sun is going down. This is not a rising sun, this is a sunset. And it's a reminder, and this is where the symbolism starts to help us realize that this is not about an actual physical death. This is a reminder that the sun sets every day, but it comes up every day as well. So you have a death and a rebirth in every single day. So that's really what the sun is showing here. Interestingly as well, the towers that you see on either side of the sun, they appear on the moon card. I'll talk about those more in a video with the moon, but you can understand there is this connection between the sun and the moon. As one dies, the other is born, and vice versa. So now let's look at the big scary creature in the middle of the card. You've got a skeleton riding a horse, which is totally normal. In this case, the skeleton represents that part of us that survives, in a way, after we die. When our bodies decompose, your skeleton is the last thing that's left. So oftentimes when we think of death, we think of the harbinger of death, you'll often think of a skeletal creature. This one is not holding a scythe, it's not wearing robes, but that said, there are some decks that do feature that type of a treatment. In this case, what you see is the skeleton wearing a suit of armor, and it's a black suit of armor, which in a way implies the black robes. Now, black is a color we commonly associate with death, with mourning. Suit of armor represents invincibility. So this means that when death is coming for you, you're not going to win. You're not going to defeat death. Death will defeat you. I'm sorry, this is dark. But understand, it's the inevitability that whatever's coming is coming and there's no avoiding it. Now, the white horse that you see the skeleton on, again, we've talked about white as a color in the tarot before, represents purity, that sort of higher spiritual self, that spiritual knowledge, that innocence as well. So death is coming in with this pure, innocent, spiritual connection that is meant to help us feel calm, meant to help us understand that this is part of a cycle. It's part of something that we have to go through. Every person has to go through. Oh, one thing I forgot. I can't believe I forgot this. Death is number 13 in the major arcana. 13 sits right in the middle because remember we've got 0 is the Fool. So 13 is right halfway through your Fool's journey. 13, a lot of people, it's an unlucky number, sorry, but there is no coincidence that death is the 13th card and that there is that connection to that superstition. But also, like I said, halfway through the journey, death is not the end of our journey. If it was, it would be card number 22. Death is in the middle. Why is it in the middle? Because something needs to end in order for something else to be reborn. So when this card shows up in a reading, what it means is that some part of your journey is coming to an end where another part will begin. We need to give something up in order to gain something new. So likely it could mean the end of a relationship. It can mean the end of a job. It could be your school year is ending. You're going to go to a new school. It can mean a lot of different endings. It really comes down to what the energy of that reading is. This card is really about helping us to understand that endings are inevitable. It's just part of life, but that rebirth and something good always comes from it. And if you think about it in the spiritual aspect as well, as somebody who speaks to people who have passed away, we know that physical death is not the end of our existence, that we continue on after that. So I'm not going to say that this card is ever going to mean an actual physical death, but if it did, you would still know that you would exist or that person would exist beyond their physical passing. There is a rebirth in a different plane. You can think about it that way, symbolically as well. The end of something, when this death card shows up, it looks scary, but it's meant to show you that something is naturally ending that needs to. There's a rebirth into something better. Now, again, I always will give you the meaning for reversals, even though I don't read things that way, but let's say death shows up upside down. This can really mean a resistance to change. So right side up, it's that rebirth. It means change is coming. If it's upside down, it means you're really just digging in your heels. You just don't want to accept and move forward. It's keeping yourself locked into a situation that needs to end, that needs to retire, and it's just not. So if it shows up reversed, it means that you're doing something where you don't want to move forward, and that's really something that's holding you back. So there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this week's Tarot Tuesday. I hope you're now understanding that death is just part of the journey. It means change. It doesn't mean we're all gonna die. Well, wait. We are all going to die eventually someday. But in your readings, it doesn't mean that that day is today. So I hope this has helped you very much. We'll see you next week and have a good Tuesday.